Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us once again here on our last day of the 2023 Sloan Sports and Analytics Conference. Braving some weather this morning, so we all appreciate you guys coming out. We are very excited to have this creating an NFL player tracking metric presented by ESPN. We've got three great panelists / moderators up here to help with this conversation today. First, we have Seth Walder, who's an analytics writer at ESPN. We have Brian Burke, the data scientist at ESPN, and we have Allison Laux, who's the director of business development and innovation at ESPN. So similar to how we've been doing panels all weekend, it will be about 45 minutes for the panel discussion. I believe about 10 minutes at the end for audience Q&A. If you want to submit a question, please do so via Twitter at the #PlayerTrackingMetric. I'll be monitoring that, and we'll submit some questions at the end for these guys to answer. And so with that, Allison, take it away.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Max. Yes, so Max gave a good introduction, but I can provide a little more depth on what Seth and Brian do for our team. Up here, we are like 30% of the ESPN Analytics team. Brian is our kind of lead data scientist, has done just a tremendous amount of work. I mean, he is a seasoned veteran of this conference. Some refer to him as the godfather of football analytics. But he's done a ton of work, not just in the NGS space, but with win probability models and expected points. So this is he's just fantastic. And then Seth has been our analytics writer for several years. Is fabulous, certainly in the football space, NFL especially, and has done a great job using the NGS metrics that Brian and team have built to tell a bunch of great stories. And really at ESPN, that is our goal. Like we are telling stories. We're not working for teams. We're not trying to win championships per se. So really our goal is to engage and entertain the fans. And for those of who watch Get Up, First Take, SportsCenter, we cover the NFL extensively, nonstop, all year long. So the appetite for content is just insatiable. And having this type of analytics content has really been a boon to help drive and improve discussions. And with all of that, the NFL Next Gen Stats, just creating just a great suite of metrics that tell tremendous stories. And today we're going to take you through the end-to-end process of building a metric through the prism of our newest offering, which is our receiver tracking metrics.
Let's switch to the offensive side for this. ESPN Analytics introduced its new receiver tracking metric this season that measures receivers' ability to get open, make catches, and get yards after the catch using player tracking data. So far this season, A.J. Brown has the highest overall score of any wide receiver or tight end, and by a significant margin. Brown's 86 is 5 points higher than the next closest player in Travis Kelce. Just really cool to see as these analytics are kind of coming to fruition here. So Marcus,
All right, so spoiler alert, that was about midway through the season. A.J. Brown did end up finishing the season as the the best receiver in RTM. And we're gonna have some, some visuals to help through the process here. So Seth, why don't you give us, we have an A.J. Brown clip here against the Cowboys. Just give us an idea of what makes him so special.
Yeah, so I know we're all nerds here, so no one actually watches the games, but unfortunately, we're gonna have to for a minute just to show how this works. The receiver tracking metrics are built in by three components: open score, catch score, and yak score. And right off the top, we wanted to just get into some of the fun stuff. So we figured, let's just talk about open score right away, which is also my personal favorite. The idea here is pretty simple, right? Like we're trying to quantify how open a receiver is able to get. And so what I want to show in this first play, it's going to restart in a second. Brown's lined up at the bottom end of the screen. He puts an awesome little move on Trayvon Diggs. He gets wide open, makes the catch. It's a big gain, explosive play. I think everyone agrees he's open, right? And for the model, I think it's a very easy play to figure out that he's open. If we go to the next, go to the dots. This is where we're more comfortable.
Seth loves his dots.
Oh, okay, now it makes sense.
Yeah. So like this is what the model's seeing, right? And it's I say it's like easy mode for the model because at the time of throw, there's tons of separation between Brown and Diggs. At the time of the ball arrival, there's tons of separation between Brown and Diggs. Brown is past him. Like, it's not, I don't think it's hard not to limit what Brian does. In this case, it's not hard, I think, to say, to have a model determine, yeah, that guy's open. But it's not always like that. So we can go to the next play. So here, Brown is lined up again, bottom of the screen. This is 4th and 4. And he fakes a little fade, and then he cuts inside, runs a slant, converts the first down. In this case, he doesn't have separation. Like at the time of the ball arrival, the defender is close to him. He's within, it's like 1.5 yards or so. But Brown is wide open. He has all the leverage on the defender here. So we know that in the NFL, that counts as open. There was a lane for the ball to be thrown. Brown, you could throw the ball so that it was not going to be contested. And again, I say the separation was not there. Here's the point where I think we can say, okay, how does the model think about this? If we look at this as at the time of throw, see where Brown is and see where the defender is, they're super close to each other. But which direction are they facing? Brown is facing the quote-unquote right way, where the ball is going to go, and the defender is close to him but out of position. This was a key component. We've seen separation before, but we needed to be able to say what is open. It's a different thing, and this right here is a player who's open without separation. Can we do the next one? Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, the key takeaway there is, this is XY data, so it's very tempting to just, use the Pythagorean theorem and say, here's the separation between the receiver and the closest defender, but we all know that being open is much, much more complicated.
So, and I should mention, so those first two plays, they both received super high open scores, quote unquote, from the model. So that in both cases, the model was saying, yeah, he was wide open, even though it was totally different. On this play, Brown is lining up in the slot to the right of the quarterback. He's not targeted, but this was another key component. We needed to be able to quantify a receiver's ability to get open, whether or not they were targeted, right? And so on this play, if you just watch Brown, you see he does his job. Now, there was a much better option for the quarterback. Quarterback made the right read. The receiver's wide open who gets the target. But for Brown, all we can ask of him is, did he get open? And in this play, he does. He runs a little hitch route, you can see. And at the time of throw, we can tell that he's open. Can we do the next? This is, again, at the time of throw. And I love this one. Like, it's the same thing where you can see that 11 is Brown, right? And see how he's faced in where he's going to run the little hitch, and the defender is running the other way. And Brown is also, he's powered down already, where the defender has not, Kyler Gordon. Like Brown, at this moment, Brown is going 4.6 miles per hour, and Gordon is going 10.3. So so it's like the model is anticipating that separation that's going to come. And so that, in this case, though you do get extra credit for being targeted in the model, in this case, the model is saying, hey, this is a very open receiver, even if he's untargeted.
Quick point, too, is we look at this before pass release. So we look at it 0.2 seconds before release, because especially in zone coverages, defenders can anticipate where the target's going to go, and they collapse on the targeted, and that also leaves the untargeted receivers open. So we're analyzing the picture prior to pass release so that the model does not get confused by that.
Yep. Okay, one more. We're going to play where Brown doesn't get open, and where you could easily imagine a model getting tricked and thinking that he is. So he's at the bottom of the screen here. There's some kind of miscommunication on this play. We're not entirely sure, because it looks like Brown should get open. Can we go to the dots? I think that they're better here. So like this is at the time of throw, and if you just showed this picture, it would look like Brown's open. I think that's why to me, I think why the model is so useful is you can't just look at this picture here without knowing the extra information, which is how fast are these guys going? Right now, at this moment here, Brown's going 9 miles an hour. Cam Dantzler, 3, is going 13. And it's not just how fast are they going, but the trajectory they're moving. Dantzler is coming faster, and he's going to be able to get in front of undercutting Brown. And so he's able to break up the pass, which is exactly what he does. And so the model at this point, like in this case, the first 3 plays, it all identified Brown as being very open and targeted, very open and targeted, very open, untargeted. In this case, it's saying he's not open at all, even though it looks like he has leverage at this moment. That is kind of open score in a nutshell.
All right. Well, it's good tease. We'll come back and close the loop on our RTMs in a bit. But first, little bit of a history lesson, a journey through time. RTMs came out in October of 2022, and it's really kind of the culmination of a six-year journey, and goes long before that. As mentioned before, like the appetite for deep NFL analysis it's insatiable. Brian's talked about how we kind of maxed out on what could be done with basic play-by-play data, and there's lots of other manually tracked, video tracked data that's helped kind of keep us along. But then in 2017, ESPN, with our agreement with the NFL, was able to get our hands on the NGS data for the first time. And Brian, what was that like?
It was more of a problem than anything. We literally didn't know which way was up. Like it was an avalanche of data. As a media partner in 2017, we got access to all the data, and it's a lot of X's and Y's, and we didn't know which was the long side of the field, the X, which is 360 degrees going up the field or to the right sideline. We didn't even know those things, so we had to explore that, figure all that out. So it took almost half a season just to get our arms around the data, and then we started doing some very rudimentary things with it. At the time, it was quite frustrating. It had only been used for things like max speed on a play or total distance traveled on a play, but we knew we needed to get a lot more sophisticated.
I think also, like in that time, so like Brian does all the hard work, and then I get to take his work and do fun stuff with it. And so at the time, I was also thinking like, okay, we got this data, like let's go. And then I had that sort of same like, whoa, we gotta wait and see what the heck we're doing here. And the NFL, which has done a lot of great work developing metrics as well, like they had a long way to go just like us, right? They're figuring things out. I think the irony is that I'm thinking back, like, what was I using the player tracking data for in the very first year, the very beginning? And I think, ironically, I was using it to watch more film than ever before. Because, like, the nice thing, and this is a benefit of player tracking data, is that it can create efficiencies. I could just very simply query, I want to look at all the times when Kirk Cousins rolled out left, play action, threw downfield, and it's just boom, 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 boom. And you could watch plays much easier, filtering down on very specific criteria. But it took a little while before we were developing like metrics that I think were really adding analysis.
And then we kind of, Brian had been working with the data, and we were kind of coming up on the end of the 2017 season, thinking about, hey, like what, now we have a better idea what this data is. Like, let's start talking about what we want to use it for. And kind of going around to the different stakeholders across ESPN, and certainly at the time, Monday Night Football is our biggest product. I guess our just biggest product overall, but especially when it comes to the NFL. And at the time, John Gruden was one of our analysts, and not the biggest stat numbers guy, but he kind of threw out like an offhand comment. He's like, you know what we need? We need an O-lineman ERA. That was the exact quote, O-lineman ERA. I was like, all right, like we might be able to work with that. And then, we kind of just wound Brian up and got it going.
Yeah, no, it didn't. Yeah, I mean, at the time when John Gruden asked for that, we're like, well, we'll never be able to do that. So that's impossible. Stop asking for things like that. But it points out that there was this huge lack of like concrete metrics for linemen. They were things like pressures allowed, sacks allowed, things like that. But we ultimately discovered through the tracking data that those more or less conventional metrics weren't very helpful, weren't really telling the whole story. So the first thing we developed was our pass rush and pass block win rates, and it was actually quite accidental, and actually goes back to receivers. We were asked by researchers over and over and over again, who was the closest defender on this pass? Who was the closest defender? How much separation did they have when the ball arrived? And so I just wrote this script that just automated all of this so I wouldn't have to keep doing it over and over and over. And I just drew a visualization to just kind of sanity check that I was getting the closest players. And I realized it was illustrating all the blocks, like who was blocking who, because naturally, the person you're blocking is more likely to be very close to you than not. So I thought that was just cool. Just now we know who blocks who on each play, who's getting double teamed, and so on. And then it really just was a short step from there to pass block win rate, where we thought, well, if you can get your shoulder pads past the blocker's shoulder pads, that's a pass rush win, and vice versa. So there's a time component to it all. So by the end of the first season that we had the data, I think we had a really viable product.
Yeah, and we had a really good storyline to go along with it that really helped to sell the merits of it.
Right, yeah. So immediately we noticed Joe Thomas, soon to be or already.
You got on the first ballot.
Yeah, first ballot Hall of Fame, left tackle for the Browns. And his final season, I think, was 2017. And he was, like 53rd in sacks allowed or pressures allowed, something like that. But he was 3rd in pass block win rate. And we're like, wait, okay, so our metric is broken. You go to the film, you watch the film, and you realize, no, he's doing a great job. He's doing as good a job as he's always done. It's just his quarterback was Deshaun Kaiser at the time, and he would hold on to the ball for 7 seconds and then get sacked. And you can't expect any lineman to sustain a block that long. So we're starting to gain insights right away.
That was a real game changer from a content standpoint. Like, as someone that writes about football using numbers, the trenches were such a black box, really. I mean, it was just hard to be able to write confidently, have these quantitative-based opinions based on what we had. And all of a sudden, we had this number, pass block win rate, that we could use to actually look at these offensive linemen. So I started spending like an inordinate, like a very disproportionate amount of my working time was about offensive linemen. To probably push it too far. It's like every once in a while, it's like, people do like reading about quarterbacks, okay? But the tackles were really, really interesting. And the thing about ESPN is it's a big place, right? I guess it's true in the world anyway, but it's like you can't just create a metric and expect everybody's going to use it. The thing is that, so we did a lot of internal work, which I think you have to do at a place like ESPN to show everyone, hey, here's this new thing, here's why it's better, here's what it could do, here's what we couldn't do before that we now can. But there was this like dearth of offensive line metrics, and so people did start to glom onto those, and it was, I think that's like one of our greatest successes, where what makes me happiest is like when a tackle gets signed to a free agent deal. And I know we don't have to do anything, but if you go to the article on ESPN.com, it's going to say like, oh yeah, he was 9th in pass block win rates among tackles last year when he was playing for so-and-so. And that is a game changer. So that was a good one.
Well, yeah, and then you flip it, you talk about offensive linemen, but certainly like, we provide the defensive perspective too.
Yeah.
So guys on the front seven, pass rushing, we were able to go a step further, and at that point, sacks was pretty much the only stat that we would have to quantify a defensive lineman or a linebacker. But now with this, like you're able to show, that not only does Aaron Donald get a lot of sacks, but like he's an absolute beast when it comes to pass rush win rate.
Sacks are a quarterback stat, remember. Okay, don't forget.
So that was in 2018. We had the initial rollout of win rates. And then, fast forward 2022, when we have the receiver tracking metrics. So
yeah. What was in between?
Yeah, like what have you been doing for the last 4 years besides sitting on your hands?
Allison's my boss. What have you been doing? Okay, think fast. What was I doing? So we made this long list of things we would like to do with the tracking data. And a lot of them weren't like super interesting. there would just be like classification models that would help us do other analysis in much better way. So we did things like coverage classification model. So we could tell, cover 2 from a man 1, and so we could apply coverage labels to every single play. We could do it instantly live during games. We were providing live updates to the researchers supporting the broadcast booth who could, during the game, in-game, discuss, the splits between man and zone, yards per attempt for each quarterback, if that was an interesting thing to talk about. And then once we had that, we moved on to route classification. So we built a route classification model, and those became essential components of the receiver tracking metrics. So you need to have that kind of context if you really want to do a good job telling a story about how a receiver makes a catch, gets a touchdown, and so on. So those are the kind of classification models that we didn't necessarily write a Sloan paper about or anything, but were very useful to us, and I think very helpful to make smarter fans, and those became key cornerstones of receiver tracking.
And to be clear, useful content in and of themselves. I think very much we want to be able to say, well, how does this guy do on post routes or this quarterback against Tampa 2 or whatever, right?
Yeah, yeah.
I think so. I don't know.
It otherwise existed. The teams are charting these things themselves, obviously. There's companies that chart these things, but often you have to wait until Wednesday for all the data to get out. Maybe Tuesday is when the all 22 used to be released. So we could do this, instantaneously during games, and we didn't need an army of video charters to be able to do it. So it served a lot of needs.
All right, so now here we are, and with our receiver tracking metrics. So I don't know if Seth, if you want to take us through the remaining attributes here.
So the thing that Brian did that I love from a content perspective, but I think it actually really does help, is that what he wanted to do was break down not just who is the best receiver, but let's quantify these different skills. Receiver skill is based on a variety of things, like we talked about, open score, how well can you get open, how well can you make the catch, how well can you generate yards after catch. All 3 of those things can describe different ways a receiver can have strengths and weaknesses, and certainly plenty are good at 2 and bad at 1, or vice versa. So we talked about open score. Let's talk about catch score here. I think the first thing that we think when we think of a receiver's ability to make the catch is what you're going to see on these plays here, which is just amazing catches. This is a George Pickens one. Deep down the sideline, defenders all over him, makes an incredible grab. All 4 of these plays are going to have what we'll say are really high catch over predicted scores. And so that is definitely a skill, and we are trying to quantify, okay, how can you make these crazy contested catches? They don't have to be crazy, but in this case, these are all crazy because they receive the highest scores. It's not everything though, Brian, right? Can you explain the predicted versus expected factor?
Yeah, I'll explain. So
I ask him because this part still confuses me. So
well, first of all, underneath the hood, what's going on in this metric is we're applying something called a position invariant convolutional neural network. It was an architecture that first developed by Michael Horton, and he did a paper on it here at Sloan a number of years ago. And it's an incredibly useful, widely useful and flexible architecture for football tracking data. And what it does is basically looks at the dots, and you can ask it any question. You can use it. So there was a paper this year that used the same architecture, a very similar architecture, and said, hey, what is the coverage on this play? We, in this case, used it to say, what is the probability of a catch? So we can look at that at multiple stages of the play. In this case, we're looking at ball arrival, and we're asking 2 different questions. We're saying, what is the catch over predicted, so it's a standard residual analysis. So we make a prediction, receiver has a 0.75 chance to make this catch given what we see on the field. He actually makes the catch, okay, we credit him with that plus 0.25, which is the residual. If he doesn't make the catch, we debit him that 0.75 and so on. And the problem was, and this really delayed this project, and almost killed the project, because what we're doing is we're accounting for the context on the field. That's a lot of what sports analytics is, or player valuation is doing, is accounting for the context, how well did the player do. But the problem is really self-defeating here with receivers, because the receiver himself, like we saw in that first clip with A.J. Brown, is he's creating that context. That move he made to get 10 yards open, well, he made that happen. So do we penalize him for that at the time of the catch because it became an easier catch? So that problem was just unsolvable forever. And one thing I do when I make these super complicated models with the tracking data, I'll often make a much simpler model as a benchmark, just as a sanity check to make sure, hey, is this much more complicated model working? Is it working any better than the simpler model? So I built this much simpler model that looked at the coverage, the route, the depth. Was it play action? Was he lined up in the slot? How far from the sideline? So on, so on, so on. All these different sort of general contextual variables. It said, how likely is the catch at that point? And that was just the sanity check. But then I realized this was the eureka moment. This solved that problem of the receiver generating his own context. So we look at context in a very general way, which is those sorts of variables I just mentioned, and we look at it in a very specific contextual way, which is all the dots at ball arrival. And so we can look at those things in different combinations. So that's what Seth meant by predicted and expected. So in our language, we say expected is that general context, and predicted is the specific context. And then there became a question of which one do we use? How do we use them? Do we use them in some combination? Ultimately, they were both providing good information about how well a receiver could do. We were benchmarking yards per route run, and they both help predict that for receivers. So ultimately, we did combine them into that's what catch score is a combination of those two metrics.
If we didn't do that, then players like Allen Robinson or Kenny Golladay or Terry McLaurin, these contested catch receivers would be benefiting from their inability to create separation before that, right? Sort of would say oh, these guys are the best. But it's only because they put themselves in, Allen Robinson didn't get himself open. He didn't get himself in a position. Now he's able to overcome that. There's still value in it, but it's skewing it.
In a nutshell, it's so there's this metric, completion probability over expected, which kind of looks at things in a very similar way. It's intended to kind of be a better completion percentage from the perspective of a quarterback. And it's very tempting to turn that around and just say, okay, well, this receiver was targeted on the play, let's apply the same analysis to him. But what that's doing is asking, how good is this receiver given how good he is? And so it completely broke. So that's what we were able to solve, and that was kind of our breakthrough.
So that one's catch score. We've got one left. It's the simplest, which is yak score. The idea here is we're looking at all the positions of the players on the field and looking at how much yak the player generates versus what we should expect based on the situation at the time of catch. A key component here also is the ball placement. So this model is player tracking based, but we supplement it with video tracking work that ESPN does. And so the ball placement itself is pretty critical when you think about yak. If the ball is underthrown, the receiver makes the catch, but the ball is underthrown, that might have a significant impact on how much yak we would expect. And we should actually mention that the quarterback themselves is a factor in all the metrics, right? Or to the last two.
All
three.
Open.
Right.
Tangent here. That's actually one of the more interesting things along the way. We obviously the quarterback plays a huge role in all of these things. And we thought, well, definitely the quarterback's going to play a large role in the catch. In the catch metric, he's going to play a smaller role in the yak metric based on ball accuracy. And then, but certainly it's the receiver who's getting open or not. It's between the receiver, maybe the play design, and how good the opponent is. But what we found is that's not true. So in order to account for the quarterback in the open metric and the catch metric, we basically ran like an adjusted plus minus of quarterback and receivers that spanned multiple seasons. So we had a good mix of quarterback and receivers. And you could see that quarterbacks consistently had an ability to, for whatever reason, target choice, extending plays, reading the field correctly, could actually help the receivers kind of achieve a better open score. So Patrick Mahomes, for example, who we can kind of agree is
good.
Very, very, very good quarterback. He's not super accurate. So like when we were accounting for his throws on catch score, he was pretty average, but he just blows it out of the water in open score, and we thought that was really, really interesting. That's Mahomes' superpower, is that he is, however he's doing, and we can dig more into that and tell great stories about that, is that he's helping receivers get open in certain ways. It could be looking off safeties. It could be any number of things. So I thought that was kind of interesting. Sorry for the tangent.
No, that's good.
That's definitely wanted to get into that.
That was probably going to be the first question anyway. How come you don't account for quarterback?
Okay, so back to Debo. Can we roll Debo again here? So you can just see, if you look at when he catches this ball, there's two defenders that could make the tackle. This isn't like I like this one. It's not like a 60-yard run here, but you can see like he really doesn't have any business getting more than 2 or 3 yards after a catch, but he's able to make the two defenders miss. To me, what's more fun or interesting is like when people fall short, right? Like we can all see when Debo makes a great play. I love Tyler Lockett. He's like my favorite player in the NFL. He's so good at everything except for yards after catch. He just gives up. He's like, he is resigned to no yak. He's like, maybe it's a strategic choice. I don't know what he's thinking, but he's very consistent. Like he just decides, I'm catching the ball, I'm going down. So like, here's one, we got another one, roll the next one. This one should be a touchdown, okay? He's gonna make this catch. He's got the whole middle of the field, and then he's just like, I'm good. I'll just...
Business decision.
I'll chill here. I'll chill here. One more. It's like, this one also may be a touchdown, or maybe should be a touchdown. Makes this catch. He should just make this guy miss, and he's got the whole field, and he just doesn't. And even he knows this time that was not good. Tyler Lockett is I think is a great example of why we need these three components. Like he's an excellent receiver at getting open. He's really good at making the catch, no matter how you measure it. And then he doesn't get any yak. Now that still makes him an exceedingly valuable receiver. Always underrated. I know analytics people always love Tyler Lockett. Maybe he's not underrated in this group, but I do think he's a perfect example of falling short of those expectations, and especially in a sport where like I like these stats because we're always looking at yards from an accounting standpoint. And you can go forward but still be doing a worse job than you should have done. And that's always, when we're talking about these, we're talking about like some of the NGS metrics, like rush yards over expectation. The idea that you can move the ball forward but you have still done a poor job is important to quantify. And I hope that's what we're doing here.
The Seattle receiver, another tangent, the Seattle receivers and the Denver receivers tell a really interesting story. So we can apply something like receiver tracking metrics to a different domain, which is quarterback. So Russell Wilson goes from Seattle to Denver in the offseason in a big trade and has a terrible year. And a lot of criticism is heaped on Russell Wilson. I'm not sure it's not deserved. But RTMs tell a different story. So despite Tyler Lockett's kind of very poor YAC score, he's excellent in everything else, and DK Metcalf. So Seattle, with or without Wilson, has consistently, their receiving core has consistently been at the top of RTMs. On the other hand, the Denver receivers, Sutton, Judy, they're at the dead last, like worst, obviously worse in catch score in particular. And so the story about kind of Russell Wilson's sudden downfall might be more about his receivers than about, at least partially, than about him.
Yeah, I've always walked carefully on. Judy picked it up at the end of the year. He was better, but I do always say I'm not saying that Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf and Golden Tate made Russell Wilson, but I'm just saying when he left them, it just happened to coincide with his downfall. I mean, he also had injury and
Geno Smith making the Pro Bowl.
Yeah.
Right. And then Geno Smith,
a career journeyman suddenly, makes the Pro Bowl. So all those things kind of factor together. The Bayesian in me is kind of like, hey, maybe there's more to the story than just Russell Wilson suddenly stinks.
I agree with that. Golden Tate, we go back to 2017, and that was the other thing that we know. It was so Metcalf obviously wasn't there the whole time, but Golden Tate was, and Golden Tate is another receiver that, retroactively the models really liked.
So we have open score, catch score, and YAC score. And then we do our overall score. We saw earlier A.J. Brown at the best in the league. How do we weigh those three components in order to get to the overall score?
Yeah, that was a tough problem, and we weight all those factors differently for different positions. Initially, it was different between receivers and tight ends, the mix are slightly different, but it's very, very different for running backs. So we have RTMs for running backs as well. It was a tough question. How do you yards above expected in YAC, the units are in yards. The other units for the other metrics, the open, the catch score were kind of like this residual catch probability type thing. So the units, there's unit mismatch. So how do we weight these things in terms of how important each factor is in terms of overall performance of production of a receiver? So ultimately, I touched on this earlier. What we did was we benchmarked yards per route run, which I think probably agree is the best conventional statistic for kind of grading out how well a receiver did in a given season. And so based on how well each of the components correlated with yards per route run became the proportion in the final overall roll-up.
This is a tangent, but can I talk about the rookie wide receivers for a second?
Yeah, well, my next question was going to be, what was your, besides the Seahawks and Broncos receivers, what was kind of your favorite storyline that we learned?
That's a great question. Let me talk about the rookie wide receivers. I think what was really cool about these metrics, if you look at the output and it's publicly available, it's on 538. We'll
spoiler alert.
We'll show the link, and you can look at it. You can look at past seasons, combined seasons. We're happy that that's all out there, so you can just see the results. What's interesting is you tend to get a lot of the star players are all up there at the top. It has that face validity. I think that matches what we think. But of course, there's going to be cases that surprise us. To me, I think we know all these players are good, but Chris Olave, Garrett Wilson, George Pickens, Christian Watson, all of them were in the top 21, I think, in overall score. Especially Olave and Wilson. You look at them, they had 1,000 yards or so each, which is good for a rookie wide receiver. But what these metrics are telling us are on a play-to-play basis, critically accounting for the quarterback that they're playing with, these are some of the best receivers in the NFL, particularly Olave, who is in the top 10. And so Olave's running these routes, playing with Jameis Winston and Andy Dalton, and maybe there was a Taysom Hill pass in there, who knows. But it's really hard to take a receiver and say, like, this guy is great and feel really confident about it when he's playing with such poor quarterback play. And I think we can have that thing. I think it's like, we know that rookie receiver class was good, but it was seriously injected talent into the position. And this I think helped us figure that out. I think about the all four playing with bad quarterbacks, depending on what you think of Aaron Rodgers. So.
Some years better than others. So one of the key things about RTMs is, all these metrics that we've put together over the years is we've basically only served them up through Seth's articles, through graphics on shows and telling stories that way. But what we really wanted to do was make more of them available to fans, to be able to kind of dig around in the data and find their own stories. So, when Brian was working on this and in the late stages, we reached out and ended up partnering with our friends at 538, who are actually part of ABC News, so they're part of the broader Disney family. And as for those of you who follow 538, they've got fantastic data visualizations and landing pages and stuff. So we worked with them to build out a really cool visual data viz landing page that you can get with the handy QR code. And this is something that we're hoping to do more of. With our different metrics and finding ways to make them more available to fans and so forth.
Yeah, I mean, I like using them, you like using them, or building them, and I think our goal is, we hope we want people to be able to use these to help analyze football, just the way that we do, that teams do, that everybody wants to. I think.
Yeah, you can also follow Seth and Brian on Twitter. They like to drop in their favorite notes using these metrics.
So the public-facing aspect to these metrics are a little more challenging than, say, like our win rates. One of the great things about win rates was that Seth came up with a name, and we were like, what do we name this? And we wanted to avoid saying offensive lineman rating or grade or what. We didn't want to imply that this was like the end-all be-all say on how good a lineman was or pass rusher was. We're just advertising what this is. This is like the percent of time that these players can sustain a block or beat a block by 2.5 seconds. And there's no other implication about how good or bad a player might be. And so it's like an average, like a batting average, or an ERA, like what John Gruden was asking for. And then, but for this, it was the units were very, very complicated. And then, in order to combine them, you have to normalize them into these Z-score things. And the average ESPN fan is already kind of checked out. And we use Z-scores, right? And they're like, okay, whatever. And so. One of the things we had to do is make sure it was digestible by a fan, and we want to keep things fun and entertaining. So that's we convert things into the 0 to 99 score, a lot like our QBR metric, which was successful. So if we were doing this for a team, if we were doing this, we had different use cases for this kind of analysis. Maybe we don't do that. We have a more sophisticated final number, final set of units. At the end of the day, but for our purposes, for ESPN fans, it was quite convenient just to go to the 0 to 99 scale.
The one thing that happened there is that Deebo Samuel broke the yak because there's no one like him.
So yeah, last 2021's Deebo yak year was so incredible that he would be the 99. That season would be the 99, and then like the next best season would be like a 60. Like we would never. It just didn't work. So yeah, at the end of the day, the kind of the scales are clipped. So if somebody's a 99, it could be that they're like a 105, actually. But yeah, we try to keep things a little bit simpler.
All right, one last question, Brian, before we get into the questions. Which, by the way, lots of really good questions. So look forward to those. But now we've got RTMs out there. What's next on your hit list?
Yeah, yeah. A lot like the CPOE metric, it's very tempting to just kind of flip this around and say, okay, who is the nearest defender on this play, and do the very same analysis on that, and then credit or debit the defender with the outcome, the residual outcome, over expected or predicted. But I've tried that, and it's just not good enough yet. The distribution of kind of blame or fault or credit on the defense, especially in a zone coverage, it just isn't immediately clear. It doesn't fall on the shoulders of just the closest defender. So it's going to take a whole lot more work. So when we check in 5 more years and you ask me what I've been doing with my time, that'll be that.
All right, we'll move on to some questions from the audience. Is there any data you wish you had that you could include in RTM to make it better? Or is there something that wasn't included in the first version that could be in future versions? So apparently this person's asking you to, or your next project is to iterate on what we already have.
Okay, so what I wish I had was the progression, like the play. So we know the routes, and we kind of generally understand the route concept, like what this play is supposed to be. But what the progression the quarterback is supposed to go through in terms of reads, it isn't immediately clear. So you can infer that a little bit. I'm not a QB coach, or it's a little bit beyond me to be able to do that. And it's certainly difficult to kind of teach a computer to be able to kind of recognize those things. So that's what I wish I had. That would really improve, because then we would know exactly when to grade out a receiver on, like, say, open score. It might not be 0.2 seconds before pass release. It may be, maybe a fraction of a second before that, fraction of a second after that.
What about Z-axis?
Like up and down.
Up and down.
Yeah. So we, with the dots, with the NGS player tracking stuff, there's, it's a flat world. So we don't see the Z-axis, so we can't tell if a receiver's like jumping.
Right.
So we augment it with our video charting data for the pass accuracies and things like that, including drops. So we can tell a drop. But yeah, if we had a full 3D kind of tracking, that would be pretty cool.
It's much more difficult to reach peak performance, say, down 4, 2 minutes left in a game. Is there any contextualization of time and score, like, a pressure element to this?
No. It doesn't. The contextual information is play specific. It does include field position, but it does not include some sort of game level leverage, kind of games on the line kind of stuff. It's agnostic to those considerations.
How do you contextualize teammates' influence on a pass block win rate, or receivers getting open?
That's a really good question. It's something we probably should have mentioned earlier. So different receivers attract different amounts of attention from the coverage. So part of the open component is sort of a gravity concept about how well, or how often, I should say, a receiver draws multiple defenders within a certain threshold. They're sort of given extra credit when that happens. And then conversely, if you're not drawing extra attention very often from a defense, then you're not getting that credit, which effectively kind of suppresses the open score metric.
It was a big thing with the pass rush win rates, and the questioner actually even mentions Aaron Donald by name. But a guy like Aaron Donald's getting doubled all the time, most of the time, and that is something that you take into account and give him that credit for.
Yeah, let's give credit to the new king, Chris Jones, because he was this year. Chris Jones was doubled as a playing defensive tackle this season more often at a higher rate than anyone else, and had a higher win rate than anyone else. Donald had a higher win rate, but he didn't qualify because he got hurt. But I think that double team component is really, there's a few things. It's really important. It's often a sign of alignment, so I do think it's it's important contextual information when we look at the win rate, say how often were you doubled, or conversely, if you're a tackle, how much help are you getting from the guard, because that can vary widely too. Like Orlando Brown is a good tackle for the Chiefs. He's like 16th, 18th in pass block win rate, but he gets almost no double team help. So they're sort of saying like, hey, we're putting you on an island, and I think that is important. We don't have, one thing on my to-do list is like maybe like a strength adjusted, some sort of win rate that adjusts for the situation, play action, rollouts, and then teammate help. The other thing that I think I often look at, I just sort of eyeball, but we don't have help, is like if you're surrounded by good players on the offensive line, even beyond double teams, I do think there is an effect there. I'm sort of just hypothesizing, but I think about like Ethan Pocic, I never know how to say his name, Browns center, who comes into a situation where the Browns have a good offensive line, two good guards on either side of him. He plays really well, better than he's played in the past. And I think he probably played well, but it's probably pretty good when you've got two guys on either side of you that are very good as well.
Yeah, Browns have a good O-line coach too.
Yeah.
So for yards after the catch, how do you contextualize the defense to determine the expected yak?
So the expected yak is based on just the dots and the accuracy of the throw. And so the context is the dots themselves. So it's not just the X and Y locations at the time of the catch, but it is the locations of any potential downfield blockers. It's their relative speeds, directions, and so on. So once the ball has arrived, basically the coherence of any kind of coverage structure is broken down, and the defenders are converging on the ball carrier. So at that point, it seemed pretty clear that the context that it was kind of screaming at us that's the context. It's where the defenders are, where any blockers are, what directions are they going, what their relative speeds are.
Gave the Mahomes example about helping get his receivers open. Are there any other, factors in that, that are considered general coaching in helping, in schemes that might be more likely to get receivers open?
I mean, absolutely.
Just like the Patriots,
yeah.
the guys are always open.
Absolutely. But it's almost impossible to separate scheme from quarterback, right? Because quarterbacks are consistently kind of in the same scheme. There's just not enough, data, not enough mixed data where we can't perform controlled experiments where we take Mahomes out of Andy Reid's scheme and put him into a McVay scheme or put him into Baltimore scheme or anything like that. So until we can do that, unfortunately, we're just kind of left with what we have.
We are including, in the general context that Brian talked about before, we are including the route the receiver's running and the coverage that you're facing. But that is just, so that's something, but it's just a sliver of I think what we would call scheme, and we would be naive to think that scheme doesn't play a
I mean, it does account for scheme in terms of this scheme involves a whole lot of screen passes, and so it's recognizing that this is a screen pass, so that it can see where the X's and Y's are. It knows or if this scheme involves a lot of downfield passing. So it does account for that on a play level, but there's no sort of variable in the overall model that's is Andy Reid true false. So
Here's a good one. How is RTM as a predictive metric? And then are some components more predictive than others? I know, Seth, you love turning these into predictive metrics.
Yeah, we haven't. I think what I would say, unless Brian corrects me, is the answer to this question is TBD still largely. I think what we know is that open score is the most stable of the three metrics, which I think makes sense. Open score, then catch score, then yak score in that order. Am I right about that?
Yeah, in
Yeah.
terms of consistency. Yeah.
in terms of consistency. So that's predicting itself, not necessarily predicting yards per route run or receiving yards. I think the short answer is we still have work to do to find out.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's fun. So, you build a metric like this, and then you can go harvest it. But I can answer the question in terms of just predictiveness overall. It definitely will be predictive of certain things. Hey, your fantasy lineups, or who's going to break out next year, maybe, things like that. So, when you do build metrics like this, you have to test whether they're really telling you anything kind of consistently and structurally. Is this something systematic you're actually detecting? And one of the things you do is you examine the correlation of a metric from year to year at the player level. And so if you're really measuring something quantifiable and systematic about a player talent level or production level, then it's going to correlate. It'll travel with the player. It'll travel from year to year. It'll travel from team to team when he changes teams. And the open metric is quite consistent. It's about as consistent as batting average is in baseball, which I think we all agree is fairly indicative of a batter's skill. And then next most is catch, and then yak. Other way around, yak then catch.
I thought it was catch then yak, but
Yeah, I think I was right the first time. Catch then yak, yeah.
So Seth, you have turned the pass rush win rates into somewhat of a predictive stat. You predicted sacks and so forth. Can you just give just a little background on how you've made that connection?
Oh yeah, so for the win rates, we certainly know that they're predictive. Players hold their pass, like if we think about pass block win rate, they hold that skill that's pretty stable from year to year. And so certainly like things I've done in the past have been like predicting a team's win rate based on the players that they have. So that can sort of account for if they're bringing a new tackle. And then I kind of went down a rabbit hole trying to predict sacks, which I mentioned are like a QB sack, but I'm lying because it's like 60% a quarterback stat or something. But like obviously the quarterback, the offensive line, the pass rusher, they all play roles, as does the situation. Like if you're winning, you're going to be more likely to get sacked. If it's 3rd and 10 and the opponent is down 7 and there's 4 minutes left, you force them into a desperate situation. So they have to try and run a deep play or something like that. That's when the sacks come. You put all those things together, and we can start to predict sacks. And for pass rushers themselves, we certainly see that their ability to beat blockers within 2.5 seconds is indicative of their future ability to get sacks. Though I also believe that the win rate is essentially like the first half of a pass rush, and then finishing the sack is a second half. There is a second skill there. There are players like Khalil Mack who doesn't win that often initially, but often finishes
when he
sack.
does, it's brutal. Yeah.
And then Jadeveon Clowney is someone who wins often early, but very rarely is able to finish that play. I think those two things are often a player has both, but it's certainly possible where you have one or the other.
All right, last question. Do any route types tend to have higher scores in any of these components? Does that factor into the model at all?
I don't know, but they shouldn't.
They should, yeah, they shouldn't.
Since we're trying to account for that in the metric, but that's a good question, and I don't think I can.
What I will say is if this is independent of RTMs, but I certainly like looking at routes versus coverage types because we can see patterns there. And like if you think about like a go route, for example, is much better against cover 1 or cover 3 than cover 2 or cover 4, something like that. And go routes, I know, are one of the most inefficient routes in terms of yards per route run, whereas deep crosses are probably the most efficient. Deep crosses, deep outs, slices, digs, those are like the most efficient routes.
Probably, the routes that you run play action with, probably.
Yeah.
All right. That is
Cool.
it. We are done.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.